We're starting with Ms. Brown asking Senator Cappiello the first question.
Senator Cappiello, the current banking system crisis has been blamed on lack of regulation, transparency and ethics, and loose lending practices, among other things. What do you see as the main causes, and what are the most important changes that you hope to make to the system in order to get the country out of the current crisis and to prevent a future crisis?
Thank you. I think the first issue is that Congress and the administration in the last number of years in both parties dropped the ball on this issue. Expanding home ownership is a laudable goal. Everyone wants to own a home in this country. It's the American dream. But we have to make sure that the people that are buying homes can actually afford those homes. Well, over the years, there were regulations under Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, government-backed agencies, quasi-public agencies, that were told they had to expand their guidelines for home ownership, where people were buying homes not with 20% down, but with 10% down, 5%, sometimes with no money down. Now, calls were made to reform that system, but those calls were unheard. I think, first of all, we need to start by saying we're not going to allow Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, these quasi-public agencies, to give campaign contributions to members of Congress, especially those that serve in the Financial Services Committee. Second, we need to start looking at bringing back the systems that were in place years ago that got us into trouble. Now, this current bailout that we've heard about, that's over $700 billion, I was absolutely unequivocally opposed to. There was no reformation of the system. There were no safeguards in place for the taxpayers that my two young sons, Jack and Jude, that are 3 and 1 years old, are going to be paying off for the rest of their lives. There was nothing whatsoever to ensure that executives and CEOs didn't get bonuses. Just this week, we're finding out that out of these $700+ billion that were spent, $70 billion may be going to CEOs and executives' pay from those banks. Henry Waxman, a Democrat, chairman of the Government Reform Committee in Washington, is saying that might happen now. How can we pass a bill in Congress without truly having those reforms in place and truly having the oversight, especially when thrown into that bill were billions of dollars in pork for wooden arrows, for rum dealers, for NASCAR? That's simply not the right way to go.
This is fundamentally about trying to stem what could be and could have been the greatest economic crisis that this country has faced since the 1930s. Those are the stakes that were in front of us when the legislation was put before Congress, and frankly, the stakes that still remain in front of us now. To me, as a new member of Congress, it probably would have been easy for me to stand there and say, you know what, I'm going to vote against any legislation that comes before us to try to responsibly address this crisis, because I wasn't there when things went wrong, and so I'm not going to be part of the solution. But the alternative to doing something was doing nothing, to allowing the banking system to fail around us and result in devastation to our business community, the absolute freezing of credit that we rely on to continue to grow our economy. This wasn't an easy or fun vote for any of us, but it was a responsible vote. And there are significant safeguards in this bill to not only put restrictions on the CEO pay of the executives who take part in it, but also to make sure that we get a return on our investment. But the question is about what do we do going forward, and I think that's the critical component. This is just a tourniquet on an economy, frankly, that has been in crisis for a very long time. You ask middle-class families in Danbury whether the economy just lurched into crisis 2 months ago, and they look at you with a pretty quizzical look, because for families here, they've been in crisis for a long time. Wages remaining flat, healthcare costs, energy costs going up. We have to rebuild our economy based on those middle-class families. We've got to cut taxes for them, cut taxes for the small businesses that they work for, and go back and do the work that Congress has not done over the past 10 years. The fact is, as soon as the Democrats took control of Congress, within 4 months, we passed a reform bill through the House of Fannie and Freddie that the Republican Congress did not do for the 12 years that it controlled it. Had they done it, we wouldn't be in the position that we are now. We have to continue on that path.
30 seconds.
Thank you. I can't believe what I'm hearing. It was the Democrats in Congress, it was Barney Frank, it was Chris Dodd that stopped any reformation from taking place. In the last 2 years, you have served in the Financial Services Committee, Congressman, and you have done nothing to warn people about this crisis. And then when this bill was passed, it was $700 billion. Statements were made that there would be no CEO bonuses and benefits, and now we're reading in the papers that will happen. You ran on no pork and earmarks, but yet there was billions of dollars in pork and earmarks in this bill. That's simply unacceptable.
30 seconds.
Again, it's simply not true. Within 4 months, I'm happy to forward you the vote count. The Democratic Congress passed the strongest reform of Fannie and Freddie in a generation. And in addition, passed a predatory lending bill that would stop the abusive lending practices that led us to this position in the first place. All happening within the first year of the Democrats taking control of Congress. This is a bipartisan problem. I'm not suggesting that Republicans were responsible for us getting into this mess, but instead of the blame game, we've got to step forward and start talking about what our solutions are going forward.